This is an RNZ podcast.
Kia ora and welcome to Context with me, Guyon Espiner.
And me, Corin Dan.
Context is the backstory to the front page story.
We take an issue making headlines today and trace its long shadow to try and figure out how we got to where we are today.
But there's a catch. Only one of us knows the topic we're going to talk about.
Yes, quite a big catch too, isn't it? We take turns, of course, being fair and balanced folks. So, Guyon, you are up first. What are you going to drop on me today?
Inflation.
Oh.
It's pretty much your favourite subject, right? And we're going to talk about this today, and we're going to talk about how we manage it and how we used to manage it. I mean, in terms of, like you say, we take an issue that's in the news today. I mean, this story is everywhere all the time, right?
Oh, completely. I mean, you just think about, I get up every morning, most mornings I'll check in on the market, CNBC, global cable channel, just looking at markets. Pretty much every morning they are obsessed about whether or not inflation's a little bit higher or a little bit lower and whether there's going to be a cut in interest rates, whether there's going to be a hike in interest rates. They're totally obsessed by it. That's the money people are absolutely obsessed by it because it has such an impact on the money supply and on our cost of living.
Well, that's right, because so you've got the market side of it, but then you've got the personal side of it. How much is my butter going to cost? How much are mortgage rates are going to be? And that's why politicians are absolutely obsessed with it, including our own.
The cost of living is without doubt the key issue for all Kiwis.
Inflation is out of control.
New Zealanders have been doing it really, really tough.
I know how hard it is for many families.
We are starting our 100-day plan with a laser focus.
We have to get inflation down. The reason interest rates are going up is because inflation's gone up.
For inflation to stay at these high rates would be very alarming.
So, understandably, they're obsessed with it because there's nothing, what do they call it? Hip pocket issues, really, eh?
Yes, and I guess when it's stable and when it's in the dream scenario of what, 2%, 2.5%, when it's sitting in the so-called band, and I'm sure you'll talk about that.
The Goldilocks zone.
It's not on everyone's minds, are they? They're thinking, and if wages are increasing a little bit more, if things are stable, well, people are thinking about other things. But if that inflation rate is soaring, as we saw after COVID, wow.
Well, you mentioned that because, for a lot of the century even, there were serious people having serious conversations about how we'd beaten inflation. Do you remember that? For years, people were saying, because inflation was just nowhere.
We did, didn't we?
Well, pretty much. We did for many years, but then it roared back, didn't it, under COVID? And you'll probably remember this down to the decimal point. So we saw inflation burst back in COVID. What did inflation peak at in New Zealand?
I would guess at around 7, in the 7s.
Yeah, 7.3.
Yeah.
7.3%. It's pretty good, isn't it? Well, it's not terribly good number for the government, but that was the highest in 32 years.
For 32 years, we'd had it under control.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. And New Zealand obviously wasn't alone in that COVID spike because Britain was over 9. In fact, Britain got to 11, and America was over 9% in inflation-wise. Why, for people listening, do you think that COVID caused that? I mean, what was the impact to give that impact of inflation?
Quite simply, when COVID hit, and you'll remember this well, I mean, people were thinking when COVID first hit that we were going to have an economic crisis like we had not seen for a generation. People were suggesting there was going to be 30% unemployment. It's reputable economists.
I remember I did the story.
Yeah, I think you showed Bill Jacob.
Yeah.
And people were going and so people were freaking out, rightly so, because they saw you shut down an entire economy, you close your border. I mean, it seems so extraordinary. You close your border with this huge tourism industry, bang, boom, no one's coming in. It was enormous. And the response was because we had been through the global financial crisis. And we had, prior to that, there was the Great Depression, and the thinking was when that type of scenario happens, it's up to governments and central banks to step in and flood the zone with money.
So you Prime the pump.
Get the money flowing in there, be that demand that has gone away, and that came through in the wage subsidies and all that stuff, and they pumped the money in. Now, the bit that was the problem, that was the right response initially, but it arguably went on too long.
So does my sixth form definition of economics, does this hold for inflation, that it's too much money chasing too few goods?
Absolutely. I literally was trying to explain this to one of my sons in the car the other day, because you can just sort of feel it. It's like all of a sudden, if everyone's feeling rich and everyone's got money, then they're all going, I'm going to buy that sofa, I'm going to buy that thing.
Let's take a practical example. You're running a coffee cart on a building site. Immediately, let's say that you doubled everyone's wages. What's going to happen to the price of coffee?
Yeah, well, they can have 2 coffees a day, 3 coffees a day. This guy making coffees is
at the price,
and he's got to find more coffee. I mean, I can remember talking to people at that period who you couldn't, trying to buy couches and trying to buy electronic goods and things. People spent like crazy. And the other thing was they hoarded all their money because we were locked down, and they had all this money to spend. It was quite an extraordinary time. I don't know if you remember, but it really did you could feel it in the economy when we had that sort of initial post-COVID boom in house prices. House prices went up enormously. I mean, $500,000-$600,000 was not uncommon to just be, in a very short space of time on a $1 million house. And people just felt wealthier, and they just were more willing to spend.
Let's go back in time a bit. So 7.3 was the inflation peak in this COVID era, but you wouldn't have got out of bed for that in the 70s and 80s. That would have been a great result. So I want you to see if you can guess when inflation peaked in the modern era in New Zealand and what it peaked at.
Yeah, I'm going to have a go at this. Okay, so we would have there was obviously
70s and 80s.
Yeah, I mean, Reserve Bank Act, Brash, and all these guys who came in to the monetarists who came in to tackle it, bring it under control. I feel like it would have taken a little bit longer than initially thought. So I'd say late 80s when it probably peaked.
Yeah, at what?
I would over double digits, 15, 17%.
You're a little under. It peaked at 18.9% in June of 1987. So you think about that. You're going to the supermarket in January with $100, you buy a trolley of goods. By December, it's $120 for exactly those goods. So inflation in the 70s and 80s was extraordinary.
Well, it just reminds me of, I remember when I was a kid watching the Mainland Touch. Do you remember that show? We had the regional television
local
show.
News,
yeah. And I can't have been very old, but they had an iceberg on the set with money in it, and they were waiting for the price freeze to end. Muldoon had brought in a freeze on rents and on wages and everything to try and stop it. It didn't work, of course, but that was the extremes they went to.
We'll get to that because that is a fascinating part of this story. When I was looking at this, because remember, just for those of us listening, one of us knows the topic, one of us doesn't. So I've been the one who's been picking through the information. Corin's doing pretty well and probably knows more about this than me, even though he hasn't researched it. So here's a couple of good numbers for you. Between 71 and 88, inflation fell below 10% in only 4 out of those 17 years, and it was over 15% in 5 years. So we needed to do something, right? And let's have a listen to this. This is a little bit of a trickier one to guess who this is. I want you to see if you can tell me who this is, when it was, and what the context is.
Inflation has cost New Zealand dearly over the past 2 decades. In the 70s, many people lost much of their savings because of inflation. High inflation discouraged investment in productive enterprises that would otherwise have provided jobs. Beneficiaries and others on fixed incomes lost out when they couldn't keep up with price rises.
Struggling, brother.
Kegel?
Yes!
That was a bit of a punch.
Yes.
It was a bit of a punch, I have to be honest.
Yeah, it's David Kagel. Gosh, we're getting really excited about inflation, aren't we? Not many people would do that, but hopefully you can.
Well, I'll tell you what. Do you know that there was this? I've talked about this before. There was a game called Pole Economy back in the day.
Yes,
and you could set the rate of inflation. It was like Monopoly for people out there. It was like a Monopoly game.
Well, this is kind of what they were doing. So that was David Kagel. It was March of 1990, and he just signed something called a PTA, a Policy Targets Agreement, right? So it was 0 to 2%. So you think about that. So you've got those extraordinary inflation numbers pushing 20%. Suddenly they're like, nah, this is way out of control. We've got to get to 0 to 2% by 1992. And what's also fascinating about this is that New Zealand basically invented inflation targeting. I mean, we were pretty much the first in the world to do this.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remind people why it's such a problem, because inflation might be going at 10%. And then to compensate that, your wage demand is going to have to be up near 10% as well. But it never quite matches. And so somebody's always losing, and it creates uncertainty, and it creates a problem. You know, the economy starts to get out of whack because people can't. They go, well, I think it's going to be 10% this month, but actually it's 15. Hey, I'm going backwards.
And destroys your savings, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you'd saved a couple of $100,000
if you're not on
for your retirement, and then suddenly that $200,000
if you're not earning,
power is worth,
it's so corrosive for people in that scenario and so destabilising. So, you know, there's clearly, because there are people out there who argue a little bit of inflation is all right. I mean, there's not all one-way traffic. I wouldn't say that was, they say, a little bit of inflation because you want a little bit of demand, or you want to inflate away your debt is the other thing.
Well, that's pretty much the only good scenario, is if you owe lots of money, the inflation will actually kind of erode that debt to some degree, won't it?
As opposed to the other way, which is we don't want to think about.
So you touched on this before, but I think this will be fascinating for people because this is pretty relatively recent, right? I was nearly 20. So 1990 really, we get the Reserve Bank Act was 1989. The first policy targets agreement was 1990. But what did we do before that? This is Rob Muldoon. Everyone knows his voice. But give us the context.
The freeze on incomes will be matched by a freeze on prices. The prices of goods and services will not be allowed to rise above their normal levels applying at midnight tonight. Exceptions will be for goods such as second-hand goods and goods sold at auction. Price increases for most other goods will be allowed only if they are due to rises in import costs, changes in direct taxes, or certain government charges. Relief will be granted only in cases of severe hardship.
Unbelievable.
I know. So that's
unbelievable.
So that's the wage and price freeze. You know what year, roughly?
I don't know what year.
82. 82. And lasted for 2 years. But we were cracking up while that grab was playing because it's just so bloody extraordinary, isn't it? I mean,
it sums up so much. It sums him up, actually, because if you think about, he was trying to push back and fight the wave of free market monetarism that was coming from the US and the UK. There was the new thinking in economics.
That's true. Reagan and Thatcher around that.
And he was trying to hold on to this New Zealand, which had been the richest country, one of the richest countries in the world.
In the 50s.
But we were running out of money. Our exports were all gone, had all, turned.
And inflation was too high. So what does he do? Well, I know what to do. I'll just freeze the prices. But it's just extraordinary to me when you're thinking about it. And remember, he was Prime Minister.
Yeah, power.
But he was Finance Minister too. And what most people don't realise, he was actually also Leader of the House. Did you realise that? In the first term, he was actually also Leader of the House. So he controlled the legislative agenda. He was the finance minister.
Presumably, he could pretty much tell the Reserve Bank for what it was what to do as well.
Well, absolutely, and he did. So imagine it. You're sitting there with inflation around sort of 15%. You just go, okay, well, I'm just gonna freeze the prices for everything.
I wonder. It obviously must have. To some extent, you'd get the effect of it working, and then it just. But the pent up. Initially, but the pent up. Everything just people know what the value of things.
Well, that's right, and also think about it like so. when there's a drought or something and coffee becomes scarce or whatever, the price obviously goes up because the people who are producing things, if their input costs increase, then they need to pass that cost on. And so that's how markets work. So it's totally artificially trying to control this. You suppress it, you don't actually address any of the underlying stuff. And actually, interestingly about that, it basically led to that foreign exchange crisis that we had in 84 when the new Labour government came in. So in terms of, and it roared back inflation.
The only area where they still, I know some countries have tried rent freezes as one area, but it's similar, from memory, similar issues.
Most orthodox economists don't really like them.
They don't like them, no. But I think New York maybe tried it.
I think Mamdani is pretty keen on it.
Yes.
He's the new contestant for that.
I'm sure he is.
Yeah. But you touched on this, so about why inflation is so damaging. There are some incredible cases of hyperinflation, right? So this is when you have 50% monthly inflation rate.
How do you even function?
So I don't know if you've read any of this stuff. I knew a little bit about it before I started looking into it a bit more closely. But Weimar Republic, right? So Germany between World War I and World War II, so effectively the 1920s. So October 1923, monthly inflation rate, 29,500%. So prices doubled every 4 days. You can see that. You can see the photographs. You go Google it or get your AI chatbot to tell you that they were using money as wallpaper because it's a lot cheaper.
The one I remember was the a wheelbarrow full of money, and then someone just steals the wheelbarrow, leaves the money.
Yep, and a wheelbarrow could not buy you a newspaper. And my favourite story looking at this was this German student. He bought a coffee for 5,000 marks. And the second cup cost him 7,000 marks.
Well, and the problem is, there was Zimbabwe was the other one.
Well, exactly.
And they just sort of add zeros to your notes.
Yep.
And you end up with these, you go to these countries and they have a £500 million note.
Well, it's funny you say that. So this is a relatively recent, that was 2008, and I had a look at this, prices doubling every day in Zimbabwe in 2008. The central bank, they printed a $100 million note, then a couple of days later printed a $200 million note, and they capped withdrawals at 500,000, and that was equivalent to 25 US
and you
cents.
can just, that really brings it home. How do you function as a business, as a worker, as someone trying to calculate your household money for the week when you don't know what something's going to cost in a couple of days' time?
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because if you have deflation, then that holds off purchasing decisions. Let's say you're thinking about buying a new bed or a new washing machine. If you think the prices are going down...
Well, you wait a bit longer.
Yeah, and you don't spend. But if if you think that they're going to double in the next month, then...
Yeah. No, it's quite right. And the killer with deflation is the prices might go down, so your wages might go down, but the size of your mortgage doesn't. So your ability to service your mortgage, it's like, I remember working as a business reporter and sort of, trying to learn everything I could. And when someone finally explained to me, because people used to say, you really don't want disinflation or, and I was like, why? Well, surely it can't be that bad. And they're like, well, here's why, because everyone's borrowed up to the eyeballs and everyone's wages and prices fall as everyone holds off spending, but the debt stays the same, and so your ability to service that debt, you can see where that goes. It ain't good.
Hadn't thought about that. I wanted to talk a little bit about, because this so intersects with politics, as we talked about right at the top, and I wanted to talk about this idea of independence of central banks, because this is critical, isn't it? Because politicians, right, they always want lower interest rates.
Yep.
And again, you're going to know, obviously, who this is, but tell me who he is talking about and in what context.
People aren't able to buy a house because this guy is a numbskull. He keeps the rates too high and probably doing it for political reasons. The only time I remember him cutting rates, he cut the rates just before the election to try and help Kamala or whoever he was trying to help. He probably didn't know.
Yes, that is obviously Trump talking about Jerome Powell,
who's
the current chair of the US Federal Reserve, who he appointed.
Yes, yeah.
Just an extraordinary attack. And, and it's almost become a little bit, people just kind of jawboning and ignore it, thinking, oh, no. And to Powell's credit, he's held the line. He hasn't shown any, but he's going to get rolled. He's obviously going to get replaced.
Yeah. I mean, they got into an extraordinary situation. This might be a bit of a side road, but was it the BLS, the Bureau of Labour and Statistics, the boss of that? That's almost the worst thing that Trump has done.
Possibly I think I would put that down as the worst thing.
So just for people who that doesn't resonate with, he was given the employment data, eh?
Yep.
So he's been given the employment data, the jobless numbers, and he doesn't like them. So he fires the head of the agency.
It is quite possibly the worst thing, scariest thing he's done. And there's a big long list.
So just for the uninitiated, that's like Stats New Zealand, right?
That's like firing the head of Stats New Zealand
because they gave you the numbers and you didn't like them.
Yes, and there's 2,000 people in the Labour Department in the US who busily work away on coming up with a number. They're statisticians and economists and people. They don't have they're not political. The appointment, I understand, is a political appointment to some extent, but that person who got fired was just delivering the number. They had revised it. He didn't like that they'd revised it. They're always revising these numbers with unemployment because it's quite hard to get the exact read.
Yeah, and we do that. And we do that here too.
But the problem is, how can you have confidence in any future numbers that are delivered to Trump? Because this is the problem with people who are authoritarian type situations, is people change their behaviour for them.
If you were a bureaucrat, would you be giving him the numbers that looked bad?
So is the Department of Commerce and the other departments who look at inflation, are they going to go, well, we don't want to give him a bad number, so we give him a good number, and then the market, then people who have money are going, well, I wanted to invest $5 million on the basis that the interest rates were going to be this. But if that number that's determining those interest rates, the inflation rate, isn't right, and actually I should be asking for a higher interest rate because my money's going to be eroded more because of inflation, well, I need to be compensated for that. But how can I have faith that it's right? Now, if you start to pull those bricks out of the US economy, the reserve currency, I mean, it terrifies me because where does that end? I mean, the bond market's going to, do they just shrug their shoulders and go, oh, well, I can't see that. They are vigilantes. They're like hawks. They're like razor focused on these things because the tiniest move in interest rates affects what the money they make.
So the central bank independence thing, it sounds sort of esoteric, but is incredibly important, isn't it? The independence of the Reserve
100%.
Bank. And we do pretty well here, really, don't we?
I think we do. I think there's a general consensus between the left and the right across Parliament. I don't think anyone in Parliament would suggest that we should.
Did you feel there was a little bit of that at risk with Adrian Orr's departure? I mean, I don't want to get into that too heavily, but
I'm not sure it was the sense that...
Well, yeah. I mean, his budget was getting trimmed and he didn't like it. We still don't really know, do we?
Look, I suppose the government, they set the policy targets agreement. That's their one way they can, presumably. And then we have seen changes. This government took out the employment target.
Yes,
it was
the so-called dual mandate.
Yeah, so there's one focus, which is to keep prices stable, over the medium term usually. They usually give them, so there's that 1 to 3% range, and they usually give them some way of saying, look, it can bump out a little bit here and there or be under a little bit, but it's over the long term. We want you to target the middle. America targets the unemployment, the jobless. I think they've got a dual mandate, but I mean, it's necessarily compare. I think we do reasonably well. I don't know about Adrian Orr. There's obviously a controversy around that and the whole issue. He was upset that he didn't get the money. He thought the bank deserved to do its job properly, and he was that was the publicly cited reason for him going. There was obviously some. He faced enormous criticism, not from politicians, from a section of the economics community that felt that he should have been more hawkish or who didn't like his abrasive style.
Hey, before we finish, I want to talk about alternatives to monetary policy because there's one fascinating idea that I want to come to, but I'll get to that just in a second. Just another quick test. Can you think, because we've been talking about the intersection of politics and central banking, can you think of central bankers who've become successful politicians?
Well, we've got Don Brash. Do we?
He did pretty well. He nearly won in 05, didn't he?
So that's one. So you've got Mark Carney.
Yeah, tick.
Mark Carney.
So sorry for the uninitiated. He was was he central banker in Britain as well as Canada?
He was the UK. Yes, he was UK.
That's amazing,
definitely UK.
And now he's the PM.
I don't know. I mean, Janet Yellen. She was technically she was the Reserve Bank, the central the head of the US Federal Reserve, and then she was Treasury Secretary. So I suppose, but I mean, it's still not really more of a technocratic position. Rather,
I didn't have that on my list.
than a
The other one I did have was former European Central Bank and Bank of Italy head Mario Draghi, who led Italy, but only for like 13 months, which is probably quite a long
pretty
time.
good going for Italy.
It's probably quite a long time in Italy. But yeah, I mean, I guess the point really is central banking is a bit like the opposite of politics, isn't it? Because it's not really...
Well, you're praised if you're dry.
Yeah.
It's like, how dry can they
it's
be?
How unforgettable can you be? Like poor old Graham Wheeler, even Alan Bollard. Although Bollard wrote a book, didn't he?
Yeah, and painted, didn't he? He did water paintings.
Oh, did he?
Yes, he did. Yeah. And because he did one of all the central bankers gather it to Jackson Hole in the US.
Yeah, this is Alan Bollard, who was the central bank
and he did a
around
watercolour.
2010, somewhere around there.
Yeah. I mean, you want them to be dry. You want them to be. You don't. That's. You want them to be. You don't want them to be making. I would always go to. I went to many Reserve Bank policy decisions, and I'd sit in this room. And in the early days, there'd be a lockup. They got rid of it because somebody stuffed up. But all these dudes on the markets would sit with these phones, and then as soon as it went live, we're cutting 25. All these people would be on the phone before the press conference going, cut. It was quite something. And they'd put on a few sausage rolls and that, and sit there with all the Wellington sort of business journos and that. And, it's... I don't know. I would always try... Because I was in the gallery, I'd always look for angles where I'd want to force the Reserve Bank governor on a contentious issue around housing where there's a little bit of a blurry area, like or on whether or not the government was helping the Reserve Bank by doing too much spending or not enough spending. And and you'd be prodding them to see, because you wanted them to say, well, because there was an argument that the government was doing too much or not doing enough, and it was making their job hard, and they'd always, just dead bat it. They would never get drawn.
Wouldn't hit the ball off the square.
No.
Before we leave it, I'm fascinated in this idea that Labor had back in 2014 called the variable savings rate. Do you remember that?
A little bit.
So this is like an alternative to monetary policy. I'd be fascinated if you could tell me why this wouldn't work, because to me it's a really intriguing idea. Okay, so it relies on there being compulsory savings, right? So you have to save something. And let's say you're on 100 grand and the variable saving rate is set at 10%. Now, if inflation was out of control, you lift the variable savings rate to 15, just to keep the numbers easy. So that has the effect of now having to save 15 grand a year. It takes the money out of the economy, but you're not just giving your money to some Aussie bank. You're actually putting it in your own savings account, so you get to spend it later on. Now, Labor had this idea that David Parker and I think David Cunliffe had cooked up, and they went to the 2014 election with it, called the variable savings rate. I thought it was a really interesting idea.
It is an interesting idea. My initial thoughts is it regressive? Is it in terms of, would it hurt those on lower incomes more if they were forced to have to save in that situation?
Yes, I guess it is. But I suppose no more than any compulsory saving system is, right?
No. I mean, there's certainly no reason why it has to be the official. The official cash rate itself is so weird.
I guess why people search for alternatives is the brutal fact that, as we just saw, you engineer a recession on purpose, which is what the Reserve Bank explicitly did in this post-COVID era, to dampen down inflation.
It sounds like it's an idea which is it dead? I mean, does it come back?
I don't think it'll get a look at alongside their capital gains tax is another thing.
The official cash rate, I'm trying to go back into my memory now, but the official cash rate is quite a strange concept. Effectively, you've got all the banks in New Zealand, all the transactions that happen on any given day, and they have to cash up and basically hit zero, right? They have to account for all the checks and everything that's flying across the economy, millions of transactions. And at the end of the day, they have to balance it, right? They have to balance their books. If they're short, they would have the option, and they would have the option if they needed to go to the Reserve Bank and borrow off the Reserve Bank.
Is that actually? I was always a bit weak on this.
So so the bank sets that rate at which the retail banks can borrow off it if they need to. Now, they often don't, is my understanding, that they would sort it out between themselves, and there's the 90-day bank bills and all this sort of stuff that flies around. it's quite a it's quite a strange concept, I suppose. But I mean I guess that's set, and we would call it the benchmark rate for interest. So they know they can get it from the Reserve Bank at 2.5% or whatever it might be. Then if they need to, so that then determines what everybody else charges on that overnight money. I think it even used to be called the overnight cash rate on the short term side of things. So that sets the benchmark across. But I mean, there's all sorts of weird. I don't even know. I wouldn't even know how much it's used in that sense now. But but they know that the banking system knows that that's the benchmark.
Yeah, and as we've said, we've moved from a scenario where we had inflation of 15, 16, 17, 18% in the 70s and 80s. You probably wouldn't change the system. Who knew inflation could be so interesting, eh?
Yeah, who knew? Well,
yeah, you and I. Hope you are friendly to me next time that you get to choose the topic, because I gave you. I mean, that you love.
You put something in my wheelhouse. Yeah. I'll give you that.
You love this. All right, that's Context. I'm Guyon Espiner.
I'm Corin Dan. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks for listening. You can follow and listen to Context for free at rnz.co.nz or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. You can also watch the show on YouTube. Just search Context RNZ. If there's something in the news you'd like some context for, flick us an email, context@rnz.co.nz. Context is hosted by me, Guyon Espiner, and Corin Dan. Our producers are Miranda Fisher and William Ray. Sound engineer and video editor, Kori Fuimaono, and our production coordinator is Brianna Uretich-Gregg, and the executive producer is Tim Watkin.